to the InnerVerse. Fear is an illusion. The InnerVerse podcast.
Welcome to the One Within All to the InnerVerse podcast. I'm your host, Chance, and riding shotgun today is a regular who needs no introduction to the dedicated among our audience, our very own court herbalist and doctrine of signatures wise man, Kyle Denton of Tippecanoe Herbs. We've got an unbelievably rich feast of gnosis ahead of us, so I'll make introductions brief because our guest today says in his new book, Shamanic Herbal, there's something out there beyond the theater of the mind, which is unknown but always hovering nearby, beating its wings on our brain, trying to get through to us. I could definitely feel the tickle of that spiritual peekaboo game while enjoying the preparation for this episode and perusing the book. And I think that by the end of our discussion today, those wings beating on our brain will have massaged our minds into a malleable clay, ready for our own individual next steps of initiation to the great mystery. So joining Kyle and myself this afternoon is one of the greatest herbalism teachers ever born of Mother Earth and a shamanic sage of the ageless and eternal green gnosis, Matthew Wood of the Matthew Wood Institute of Herbalism. As a renowned teacher and author of more books than I could easily count, Matthew Wood has been a vital force towards the resurrection and renaissance of humanity's recollection of nature's language. His newest book, Shamanic Herbal, explores the universal knowledge of shamanism, plant teachers, animal medicines, and the path of integration of one's three bodies in collaboration with the great spirit of creation itself. So check the show notes for links to the Institute, where you can go from an herbal dabbler to a keeper of traditional wisdom through his excellent courses. And also in the description below, you'll find the ways you can support InnerVerse and Kyle's potent potions at Tippecanoe Herbs. And with that, it's time to walk the medicine path with the Sylvan speaker for Nectura Sophia himself, Matthew Wood. Thanks for being here, man, and welcome to the InnerVerse.
Wow, you're quite a poet there. You should be an author. Have you written anything other than that introduction?
I like to think that I write every time I speak.
Oh, great. Yeah.
You know, I'm compiling. There'll be a book someday.
Yeah.
But, what's going on, man? Kyle, do you want to maybe introduce your part in all this? I know that this is a meaningful conversation for you.
Yeah, it's very meaningful. I've been a student of Matthew Wood, or as my 2-year-old half Italian son calls him, Matteo Bosco. Yes, and so when Chance, when he found out that he was going to be interviewing the esteemed teacher of mine, he let me know to ride co-host and get into some of the herbal aspects of shamanism. I've basically devoured everything you've ever written, and integrated it into my own practice.
Wow.
And it's something that I bring with me in the ways that I teach as well.
Yeah.
So it's a way of life. It's a way of life, and it's an honor to be here. So thank you so much, Chance, and thank you so much. And it's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Wood, Matthew. That is.
Yeah. You know, I earned my spurs in herb store. I worked there. Well, I worked as a shop clerk for 8 years, and then probably another. Well, I still even see people there from time to time. I should say, present moment herbs in Minneapolis. And if you're ever in Minneapolis, you should visit that herb store because it's such a wild and crazy place. It was the founder. I don't know. He liked unusual people. So unusual people drop by. Of course, herb stores attract the unusual. And but yeah, that's how and before that, I worked at Llewellyn's Astrological Occult Publishing Company. So I got a bit of a pedigree, and that was my training in all those weird places. Yeah. And then finally, I started practicing on my own, first at a chiropractic clinic in St. Paul, eventually just on my own. And then I kind of retired. I still see people, some if they can find me. I still see a couple people every week usually. But I found after 25 years, MDs, veterinarians, surgeons, herbalists, just about everybody gets a bit tired of practice, and some of them just completely retire. Other ones maybe semi-retire. So it's kind of funny. But but by 25 years, you got incredible amount of skills, and it's like you can't hide what is it Jesus says? Can't hide under a bushel bag or basket or something. He says something like that. Don't hide your light under a, okay.
At the herb store that we have, it's the tallest building on the block, and at the top it was built in 1897 by a man named August Hermes. So it says Hermes. Wow. So Hermes at the top, and it's just this central hub. And for the prior to our herb store being there, it was a keto and meditation dojo for the last 45 years. So it's this great ground of synchronicity. And then just putting the plants in there, it doesn't matter where you are, but when you have a bunch of plants around you, and I've been to the present moment, by the way, and it's very charming. It's extremely charming. You could feel that it's been kind of a staple in that neighborhood for decades. And it was really inspiring for me going there before I opened up my own shop.
Oh, good. Okay.
Yeah. So I never knew that you had Hermes on your building, but it's funny that as you said that, the god of deliveries and messengers himself just graced my doorbell with a Tippecanoe Herbs package delivery.
Oh my God.
Teething tincture for our little baby and some other things I ordered.
It's amazing because in particular, the postal service at the herb shop is highly synchronistic. All we have to do is talk about it, and the postal worker comes in as if she has wings on her heels, and she always says something that we were just talking about, like a sitcom character or something like that. It's amazing. It's really fascinating. So yeah, the eagle spirit, the spirit of the post office being the eagle, and I'm really excited to get into the herbs and the shamanic herbal.
Yeah. The correspondence is one of the communications not correspondence like in the doctor's signature. I mean, coincidence. Coincidence is one of the communications from the other side. Yeah. So I'm not sure I have that in the book there, but I have a lot of stuff. Yeah. A lot of shamanic, spiritual, etc. So the book is about shamanism as a spiritual path, which is to my mind, the only way to really think about that subject, because a lot of people are into just pounding drums or this or that, kind of into the paraphernalia. And some of those people are doing important work, and other ones are just kind of dilettantes. There's dilettantes in every field. Well, we find them in herbalism, that's for sure. When I was young, herbalism, you get in trouble for being an herbalist. So there weren't a lot of dilettantes. They were just a bunch of taking it seriously, worried people, I guess you'd say, looking over their shoulder. So, but as soon as something comes about 2000, this all changed. Everything got political. I just was talking to American Indian spiritual leader who leads sweat lodges. And for last 10, 15, 20 years, it's been people trying to interfere, and I could do it better, and you're not qualified enough, and this and that. But so it was a lot of fun back before when you were but a little guy. It was a really different world, and now I don't think I could ever write a book. Golly, once in a while I give an anecdote from that time period. Bob, the owner of the store, was something else. So yeah, but so shamanism. So I was always interested from probably 13 with herbalism and nature, spirituality from even age 11 or so. I probably mention it. I have to mention it because it's Wisconsin, my mentor. So when I was 10, 11 years old, we packed up on the train and we went to, doorbell. We went to Wausau, Wisconsin, to Rib Mountain, and we had Northern Half Yearly meeting that was a Quaker thing. I was raised a Quaker, 10th generation, so you're going to become a shamanist at some generation after all that internal work. And so our Sunday school teacher, our first day school teacher, Francis Hole, he was a soil science professor from Madison, Wisconsin, and he brought us up on Rib Mountain, and he was jumping from stone to stone, and it was a beautiful sunny day, and just this feeling came out of him: nature is alive, nature is alive. And I knew it was true, and I knew I had to believe it. This is so interesting. This is one of the shamanic lessons. When you get a revelation from the spirit, it's not only do you want to believe it because it's so fun and interesting and it's otherworldly, even, and it enriches your life, but you have to believe it, because you'll not, if you don't honor those, truisms from the other world, and that I believe is actually from the spirit, then you won't get gifted that way again. In fact, you'll become kind of a vest up when it comes to discerning truth. And so there were actually two lessons there. One was, I think nature is alive is more on the soul level. I came to see nature was alive in the sense that the all soul or the all life, and this is a truth of the spirit. The spirit testifies, like from the spiritual realm, which is higher yet, that this is a true thing, that this is real. And so that was the beginning of my spiritual life, age 10, 11. And I went to visit Francis when I was about 31, when he was retired soil scientist professor by that time in Madison. This is 40 years ago, almost, not quite. And I arranged in advance, and I said, thank you. That was, that was so meaningful. That gave me the direction to my whole life. And he said, yes, that was a beautiful day. It was interesting. He remembered it too. It was just such one of those sunny days. It's incredible. So, yes, that was a beautiful day. And I said, yeah, I thanked him. He was modest. He didn't really, yes. Well, I said, yeah, I teach herbalism and I practice herbalism, but really behind it, I want to practice the wisdom of nature. Nature is alive. And he sat back and he said, yes, you have chosen well. People will always come to you because people crave that, to know that nature is alive, and they don't know how to get there. And I couldn't believe it that anybody would say I had chosen my profession well to be an herbalist. Only a Quaker elder would tell you that. But it's kind of true. I remember one student, well, she was just so frustrated and kind of a little bit angry and just difficult. Her life was difficult. And she was a botanist, trained, studied in my herb classes. And on her own, I mean, she knew that I knew that nature was alive. She could feel it in me. And that's sometimes all you need to transmit that eventually, And finally at her home, one day she tuned into elder, and elder, which is, really one of the central trees, I would say, we could kind of say, of ancient European herbalism. That would be the mother tree, really. And she after that, she was happy. She just changed completely because that was what she needed to know. So, yeah.
Elder in the Om, or it's OGAM, OGHAM. Sometimes people want to pronounce it Ogum.
Oh yeah,
it's pronounced It's the character is Ruish, Ruis, Ruish, and with a little philological switching, we can get from Ruish to the Hebrew word Ruach, which is spirit.
Yeah.
The word Ruish, which represents the elder tree, is about that inspiration. And even the doctrine of signatures, of course, the inspiration being held in the lungs, where we inspire our air, our spirit, our living life force, and the alveoli. So elder is a perfect shamanic totem to offer that spiritual wisdom, which she said, it's not the knowledge of nature as alive can't be passed. It's the wisdom. It has to be grasped. It's a personal grasping.
Yeah, I would say there's two levels. One is to feel the life, nature is alive. And then the wisdom is another step. I don't know if it is possible to separate them when you're experiencing them, but they are somewhat different. The wisdom is extracted. I'm not sure that everybody tunes into the wisdom, but they're missing out on a lot if they don't. She certainly did. That was Jolie Elan, who I taught with some. I got some tapes of her on my institute, but she passed on about early COVID 5 years ago. Yeah, not from COVID. So she was probably the funnest teacher I had. I just thought, like, wow, I'd really like to have kept on teaching with her year after year. No such luck. Yeah.
I love this philological knowledge you just brought on, Kyle. I feel like you're absorbing the stuff from this podcast quite well. And let me talk about, though, I really want to establish kind of early in the conversation, and I know establishing this is tricky, but a broader mystical definition of medicine, which is a term that, as you talk about in the book, the natives have been using for a while to the extreme misunderstanding of Westerners.
Yeah.
So apart from like the allopathic chemical definition, what are we, you talked about the transmitting of this nature is alive. That's a medicine transmission. Can we define this term more broadly?
So European medicine is just really the practice of medicine and the articles of medicine, a medicine, etc. But for the American Indian people, they can't practice medicine without inspiration, without there being an inspiration, a vision. So medicine is something you receive in a vision or a dream, and then it's true, and you practice from that point on. And medicine would therefore could be about a lot of different things. It's like you can't really have a life without having a vision to make it authentic and real. And or a dream, and they would have an elder council every year. It's a green corn dance, in the Eastern Native American way. And all the people would come together, and, they lived originally scattered out, in different places. They'd come together, and so it was a jurisdictional, anybody had broken the law, or problems, or there would be, or they would have a elder council who would look at the dreams of the young people, and what did they mean? And I suppose the dreams of anybody, if they weren't good at interpreting, So how did it benefit that person, and how did it benefit society as a whole? So medicine powers are based on dreams. It's interesting. I was talking to Elena, our friend, and of course she's married to a Lebanese guy, and she said in Arabic there's a word that if you say I had a vision, everybody takes it seriously. It's not just like over here, I had a vision. Oh, so, ha ha. And, so this is a mechanism, a part of society.
And just point out that the word you're talking about in Arabic for the vision is ruya, which is basically the same as we just said ruach. It's just a version of that.
Oh my God. Wow. Yeah. Wow. Thank you. Jeez. Oh, you're a philological. Yeah. Well, this is great. Yeah. When you follow the shamanic path, not everybody, but you really do get down to the roots of words. That's part of shamanism. In the old days was the study of language. Well, it still is if you could do it nowadays. And it's, English is a very commercial, kind of spiritually dead language. It's been killed, even, we could say, about in the 1600s. And there's a whole history to that, But, and I had a friend who was Native American who commented, who kind of traced that out. And So at any rate, so medicine could be a plant, a dream, a song, a story. Like you heard a story, boom, it's like deep in you and you tell that and it helps other people. Anything that heals or changes for the benefit of society or a person. So it just goes on. And what was it? I even heard a strange medicine power. I mean, sometimes they're like kind of useless. And like there was a guy, up North Canada, native, I can't remember, it was in Alberta or Manitoba. I heard this story and he was a drunk, but he had this medicine power. He'd fall asleep on the railroad tracks and he'd wake up just before the train got there. The train would be slowed down. But, he would they always, either they scooped him up and slowed down, or he was, I don't know why he'd fall asleep on the railroad tracks. That happened to an ancestor of mine too. He got drunk and got and died on the railroad tracks. But this guy would always get away. Well, it's a strange medicine power, but and not really that valuable, and you'd rather be sober, but so be it. So medicine powers are just a vast array of all the things that could happen in human life, and some more valuable than others. And so the Indian people heard this word medicine, and they translated what they were doing with that word. And for a long time, white people didn't understand. And I actually do quote this in the book, this Grinnell saying, if the Indians don't understand what something is, then they call it medicine. Or, it's like, golly, you totally don't know what you're talking about. And it was finally, I quote the word entering regular English as coming from what was his name, Minnesota Indian, and his wife. At any rate, but it actually goes back to that Hayam Mayasta storm a couple of years earlier, late 1970s, I think, and also mentioned, but it wasn't understood. It still was not understood. So we have Brad Steiger writing a book. He's kind of a author of interesting occult weirdo subjects, 1970s. And he really thought it was meant kind of like psychic, to have medicine meant to be psychic. But no, it's because it's entering into the white man's language, and it's just not yet understood yet. And then Sun Bear and Waban, his wife, they kind of, I think their books begin to popularize it more. Storm's book was hard to read and follow. But at any rate, so medicine becomes a part of the language more and more and more. So now today, I think most people in alternative, I don't know about most people. Many people would understand it though. So yeah, what do you think, you guys, about it?
So it's like a calling, and it's like an ability, and sometimes maybe even invested in an object. I had an experience early on in my spiritual awakening, you could say, that an object wasn't invested with this medicine power for me. A sweat lodge. It was almost like, it's basically like a spirit jumped into this rock. Yeah, story short. And that ended up being a token that I was meant to exchange to somebody else, that the medicine in that stone was for somebody else. And then they gave me knowledge that I needed for my actual personal medicine. So it's all very it's very complicated in a way. Oh, it's unique to everybody.
Yeah, that reminds me of a good example. So when a friend of mine wanted me to drive her over to the orthodontist because she thought she was going to get all shot full of Novocaine and she wouldn't be able to drive back. And it was like 7 a.m. It's like, okay. And so I drove. I don't like doctor's office. I never went to a doctor for 35 years until I got on Social Security, Medicare, and now I can go there once a year, but for free. But except that you had to pay for it too. Medicare is not free. But at any rate, so I was outside the dentist's office, just walking around on the sidewalk a little bit, and there were some landscaping stones, like little pebbles from a river bottom, about that big or so. And they were just, some of them were scattered on the sidewalk. So I kicked a few to put them back where they came from with the other landscape stones. And I kicked one with my toe and boom, it was alive. It was like, oh my God, that's alive. I'm not going to let that sit here by itself for eternity or whatever. That deserves to be known and be in association with somebody who's aware of it, has some company. So I took it with me. I mean, it's just a normal funny little pebble from the bottom of any river, kind of grayish, reddish, brownish. But later I read, there was a book and I've never seen it again. And I might have lost it. It was by a Dakota or Lakota who he was one of a small number. They were always doing this to Indians, little experiments and stuff. So, okay, we'll send you guys from your homeland in South Dakota down to Oklahoma here's a bunch of farms we bought for you and you can live there, like 3 or 4 families. So that's where he grew up. It was okay. But he had this teaching. He said the Watai stone. Or the Watai. The Watai is like when you find an object that is alive in the world like this. It might have been a stone. Then you have the right to set up an altar, to have an altar. Now, I'm so unsocial. I never been interested in setting up an altar. My friend Susan did set up an altar. She had that right. But so I still have the stone.
That reminds me of a interaction with nature that became alive suddenly. So I was walking my dog, as I did every day around the block, and I got to this tree that was kind of growing really close to somebody's steps on their porch. It was a walnut tree. Oh, and I thought to myself, if that was my house, I would cut that tree down. It's like it's really, and the tree, I could feel it. I could hear it. It immediately rejected my consciousness towards it, and it growled at me. And so excuse me, I'm sorry. I couldn't believe, I was shocked that I had been so rude with my thoughts just spilling out of me that it was almost, and so every day for the next year or so, as I walked past that tree, I felt an embarrassment as if I had said something about out loud about a neighbor that was standing there and that I had to see every single day after that. Well, eventually, in this mending of this relationship, I started to see this tree as, because it declared itself alive to me. Yeah. I said, well, you're beautiful. Thank you for the shade. Do you mind if I take a little nibble? Wow, this is really interesting flavor. Mind if I take a walnut? Okay, I'll scratch the walnut. Holy moly, that's very citrusy. And I started learning everything about this tree because I was interacting with it. And one day I walked past it, and and my dog kind of like pulled me a little bit to the side, like this happens to us too in spirituality, where we're just like, hey, what am I looking at over here? And so as I was giving him a moment to stand there, the tree said to me, the reason why things don't like to go under me is because I charge the shade of my leaves. And my leaves are shaped like this because they're an array, like an antenna, and I charge the shade. And I thought, wow, that's really amazing, because there was previously something came up about how they couldn't prove that jugulone was the component in the walnut tree that made things not grow. They thought it was, but then they disproved it, and the walnut tree told me, and I was so grateful. Yeah, and I was like, wow, I will never talk about. I will definitely ask permission before cutting a tree down. Wow, in the future, yeah.
That's medicine. Yeah, sorry.
That's medicine. Yeah, exactly. It's almost like it's a verb. It's not a noun. It's a verb. It's an action. It's interaction in a relationship. And as a previous guest on Chance's show, he was interviewing an alchemist named Dr. Stephen Young. He had commented about the mediation, the meta, between the sine wave of our experience. It's the mediation, bringing it back to center. So we get off to the side this way, we get off to the side that way. Yeah. It brings us back into this central part where we are in line with our jurisdiction and our creator and our vitality.
Yeah, I remember I was walking down the street one time and happened in Portland, Oregon with Judith Hill, the astrologer. So she's pretty tuned in. And there was this giant tree, and it was like we were both like, oh my God, this tree is alive. I mean, it was just totally conscious, just that one tree sitting there. I was like, wow. Actually, that might have been a pre-settlement tree. It was so big. Oh. But yeah, so it's all of nature is alive, but some objects and beings and living creatures have more medicine than others. And that's part of the lesson of there's dreams and then there's powerful dreams. So, yeah. So there's medicine. Yeah. I don't know. Is there any other language, Chance, that has a word like that? Are you aware of? Yeah.
No, it just is too all encompassing. It's really hard. I like what Kyle said, fitting it more into the framework of a verb. Oh, but it's a very flexible thing. Medicine is definitely an act. It calls you to action. It requires action.
Yeah.
It comes about through, this sort of like that middle mediated point in the sine wave, like you said, between doing and being. It's not quite a static thing that just happens on its own, but it's not quite something that you are doing of your own accord. It's like, it's somewhere right there in the middle.
But there's an attunement. Yeah. Right.
It reminds me in the same way, just some of my experience with shamanic technique early on was through journey work, right? Where you use a drum or rattle or a track, or there's other ways to achieve it. Yeah. And you could call it active imagination as well. Some philosophers have called it that. The important part of the balance is that you're not trying to, you're receiving the vision and you're paying attention to the vision, but not going too far into interpreting, but also not going too far into passivity. You'll lose it either way. So I think that that's like a great practice in terms of shamanic techniques for attuning somebody to walk the medicine path throughout life. It's a little more than just your basic meditation and trying not to think or counting your breath, right?
Yeah. Actually, so journeying, or plant journeying in particular, is a method for accumulating inner spiritual knowledge, which is shamanic knowledge, however you look at it. And this has really flowered in the last 30 years or so. Like, actually, Rudolf Steiner says, if you can't find a teacher on the outer plane, then just tune into plants. And he doesn't actually go much into that, although sometimes he realized he has tuned into plants. And sometimes, he actually had a friend, wasn't his teacher, he met through this friend. So this friend was also a teacher. He was an herbalist, Leo Kogowski, and they would travel on the commuter train to Vienna when he was young. And they always sat together. And Leo brought herbs to the pharmacists in Vienna, and he would teach Steiner about herbs. So that's why Steiner knows a lot about herbs for somebody who's not really an herbalist. And he doesn't practice much, but he does know. I think he heard so many stories. And then he does evidently practice attunement, but he didn't really teach how. There's not books about it by him. And then I'd say Dr. Bach comes along. That's the 1930s. Steiner died in 1926. 1930s. Dr. Bach, I'm so historical, pardon me. He tunes into plants. And then after kind of the herbal renaissance in the 70s, 80s, 90s, we have plant journeying. We have, and important people there were from the flower essence community as well as the herbal community. But flower essence community, they really rely upon that. So more and more people doing it. And I can tell you weren't privy to this, but it was, like the Bach Flower Society. No, you can't do that. No, it's Dr. Bach's canon of true medicines. It's not, you can't add to it. So actually, as usual, there was just a time period when I can't blame those people. It's just, there was a time period when, boom, you had to break out of the old stuck way. And sometimes this happens to you announced, you dream about. I've dreamed about burdock twice and forgotten both dreams almost entirely. Although the second dream, it ended, women when they're lactating, sometimes they get milk on the shirt. And that was the last vision in that dream. So I was like, wow, burdock root is a milk medicine, which isn't in the literature, but I mean, that makes total sense. I mean, it'd be really good for the baby. It's really a great herb for young and old alike. It's a universal, just excellent food tonic remedy, as well as having herbal properties. And it'd be hard to OD on it, so I can talk about it.
Oily, it's sweet. It has a way of changing the oil in a person so that they can increase. And then one of the things too, when it comes to breastfeeding, my wife is currently nursing our kid, is he starts
They'll pass babies within like a week of each other. It's great.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah.
Yep, exactly. And so, but one of the things that, oh gosh, where was I going with this? Is that the baby is really becomes a visual organ of elimination for the mother. You start to see the hormonal changes in the mother and in the baby itself. And so burdock being so helpful at processing hormonal excess in the liver and everything like that for the improvement of the baby too. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Wow. Yeah. One, like we say, even to get this information when I was young was hard, but in Priest and Priest herbal medication book, they say the 4 channels of elimination are the skin, the kidneys, the colon, and the lungs. Well, that's not how modern doctors think, and it's not how a lot of herbals were being written or anything. So you learn what the channels of elimination are. Actually, in addition, menstruation, and then you see it. Babies, the baby takes on a whole bunch of crap from the mother, and often has skin problems in the first months and stuff. So that is an excellent idea. That would be a good herb there, just as a general gentle detoxifier. Yeah. And of course the babies get the herbs through the milk. Yeah. So, well, thank you. Yeah. This is, see, when you're an herbalist, you just click your mind back and forth. Every time you say something, the other person expands on it. And, I don't know how long you've been practicing, but I always say we're all different. But after 15 years, we're all the same. Like you could have an Eskimo herbalist and you and me, and we'd all talk. And after 15 years, we all understand because it works. It's an experiential, empirical art, and you come to the same truisms, and then everybody knows them, except for a few arrogant, like, you got to follow the science. No, that doesn't work. It's like, yeah, okay, go away.
Be the capital T truth, empirical reality of herbalism. As someone that I'm more of a dabbling interest as I interview people like Kyle and yourself, building up my knowledge base sort of as I go.
Yeah.
Although I think that'll, there'll be a point where I'm the teacher of my own child and I learn what I'm teaching. I think that this is an important part of life to bring into the education of a child. The reason being is that my main interest is in language, philology, mythology, symbolism, those areas. But where the value in that stuff is not in the dogma applied by various religious sects, but in the way in which the symbolism or the mythology is teaching us something about nature, because nature is where the actual truth is at.
Right.
And you say wisdom, this is in your book, wisdom is encoded in every leaf, stone, pot, and footprint. You're talking about the green language, which I've come to an understanding or an assumption that the reason why the green language is described as a crucial element of esoteric traditions from mystery schools of ancient civilizations all the way to the medieval alchemists and everything in between on every continent. Learning to think by analogy, inference, contrast, and correspondence. Nature is showing us that there is an actual capital T truth and reality. And I even assume maybe that the language itself, like alphabets and whatnot, are derived from plants. I have a feeling that leaves and the different shapes of different plants might have been the very first form of writing. And that's a whole nother subject, but let's talk about that.
Well, either that or animals or a combination. Yeah. And it may have differed from culture to culture, but certainly the Phoenician alphabet, which is the ancestor of our alphabet, did have some animals in it. It had things like doorway and field, did have ox and snake at least. I haven't studied. I've forgotten about it. Well, I took Hebrew, and there's not a whole lot more animals than that. But at any rate, so they did have representations like that, and different cultures would use the things around them to represent them, and leaves and plants and animals so important. Really, the primal shamanic alphabet. And in my book, because you're interested in philology, I just want to go into the two types of language, phosis and logos. You probably read that part, I hope? Yeah. Well, that to me is real important because, yes, I understood the existence of the green tongue, the green language, and that word green tongue that was introduced by a esoteric writer, David Ova's son of the egg. So we feel that that's probably not his real name, but he introduced that and said, so-and-so, this author, that author is writing in that style, and so on and so forth. And then there were other examples, and I even think the birds and the bees, I think that was a language of euphemism, not originally just talking about sex, but of things that could be referred to euphemistically, the birds and the bees, like another language, a language of nature. But so it was my friend Robert Schmidt in Cumberland, Maryland, who really pointed this out to me. Actually, he was dead, and it was in one of his tapes. I couldn't believe it. I'd missed it. But talking to him, I mean, he talked about it without mentioning it real definitively. He always loved that I was an intuitive thinker and speaker. He always considered me to be unusual because I didn't go for logic like everybody else, and I went for the intuitive perspective. But there was a time when there was no logic, there was no rationalism. They had rational method of speaking. They had this more ancient language so you just described exactly what you saw, and you had to describe exactly what you saw because the snake is over there by the stone right there, not that one, the third stone. And you had to be, because you could die. You had to be out in the woods. That leaf, you can't eat. That one that looks just like it, you can eat. So it was descriptive. It was empirical. It was experience-based, and it had to be very exact. And people described their exact experience, which included visions and dreams. Well, how are you going to teach anybody if you're just stuck with the thing that you see, the snake by the third stone? How can you expand on that? Talk about snake energy, snake people, or rabbit people, or whatnot. So you have to talk by analogy. And as you said, similars, contraries, word plays kind of cover most of that. And so,
can I add a little bit onto that?
Yeah.
That I think will help with this framework. So in the West, we have a very quantitative way of speaking.
Yeah.
They actually, there's been sociologists who've studied. It's in the Peace Corps manual about dealing with different cultures.
Yeah.
Our Western way of speaking, they call it direct, where we say what we mean. It's meant to be exact, nothing to read between the lines. But in most other cultures, Eastern and indigenous kinds of cultures, less developed nations, and like Arabic cultures, there's a higher value placed on speaking esoterically, essentially leaving things unsaid for the listener to tease out.
Right.
And I think that, we're really, this sort of imbalance in the Western mind comes from this quantitative kind of thinking where we have this false idea that we can present an exact notion of truth, where the truth of the truth is that the truth is everything and is beyond definition. It can be contained in a boundary. So the best you can do is describe the qualities of truth or describe the qualities the truth does not have. But you can't ever wrap your whole arms around it and contain it in one way of speaking. So I think maybe, in earlier styles of language, this qualitative way of speaking, this more inference-based way of speaking was more highly valued because it was more obvious and evidently truthful. You weren't being dishonest by what you left out or your assertion that this was the totality. Well, can't actually contain the totality. Does this make sense? And we're totally in this quantitative way of thinking.
Yeah. Well, this change, Aristotle says that Plato was the first person to extract meaning, new information from the syllogism, which is if test, then the conclusion. So that would be if Socrates is a man and all men are mortal, then Socrates is a mortal. And like, you have to agree with it. That is direct, but it's not, it's time. It infers that knowledge is time and space bound, that it's linear like that. Not that it's like, see, the other way, the inferential way is like, there's an archetype, or it stirs your inner mind to make that connection, which is like a physical plane, mental, emotional, psychic, spiritual, whatever. So it's horizontal. It's is it vertical or horizontal? It's vertical. The other one is horizontal that way. And after he invented this method, and he valued both, he believed in four basic kind of truths to the good life. And the first one was to teach people how to think. And in fact, and he did teach, then contribute to the community was the fourth. And he didn't think people should be able to vote unless they knew how to think, which is a good idea. But, and we're going, and we're kind of in a rampant democracy where anybody can vote who thinks they can think. But at any rate, so thinking, he outlined both the syllogism for rational thinking, but also the archetype or the eidos or idea for archetypal thinking, which is to think from the archetype. Now, I have noticed even that is a little bit more, you kind of have it defined it here. It's a little more blatant than the original, than a wordplay, which would be hard to decode, or a similarity that's just inferred, but doesn't have, so many words that work this way. Horseplay, horses, you just immediately think of horses playing or something, or people playing like horses. But so there are many words that have that sort of picture image type thing. And I can't remember what I was going to say there, but at any rate, the archetype fixes things more, and we've probably all studied astrology. Robert believed that astrology was developed by Eudoxus, who was 25, 35 years younger than Plato and a little older than Aristotle. And I think he's proved it, but people's not going to believe it because it's too different from what the experts say. But so astrology has these very firm archetypes like this, but that changes how you're working with this language because you have a fixed archetype. And indeed, it's not like that was the very beginning of that, because the shamanic, that's a bear medicine, owl medicine, and ant medicine. That already has some fixation to it where you're using like an abbreviation for the experience. And so that existed, but so he worked that out because he wanted to help intuitive thinking as well as rational thinking. Aristotle went berserk with rational thinking. He just wanted everything to be rational. And he also kind of minimalized, I don't want to go into it, but his interpretation of Plato's intuitive thinking was a little too fixed in some ways. But so everybody wanted to copy this method of rational thinking, if then conclusion. And it just happened, I read in Rudolf Steiner in his, he'd do his historical examinations of the past. And he says that no time period was there more lying than in the, during the centuries before Christ and afterwards during the Roman Empire. People they just lied and lied and lied. And that's the problem. You think, oh, the syllogism tells you the truth, but it's so easy to deceive with it that it's used for lying. And so that was a time period, and that came to dominate Western linguistics and thought. And Latin really is not conducive to this, but Greek is. And when I took Hebrew, I was like, golly, how could the Jews stand all this? Like all this Western culture, this is like crazy. Like, and I could see the Arabs, I think, really don't like it and don't put up with it as much. But so this very fixed, rational quality is not in Hebrew, and it's not in it's not in Arabic, as you say. It may be that Arabic is a little bit more inferential like that. Hebrew, it's like it's hidden, kind of. It's not. You could speak Hebrew and not get into it, and I think that may be because so many centuries of training in Western thought. But at any rate, so language is very important, and phasis and logos. Robert defined this, and it was just like mind-boggling. And well, I mean, like, there's only two people who ever spoke ruthlessly adhered to the phasic method that I've ever found in speaking in public. That would be Heraclitus the Dark. He said this: the road up is the same as the road down. So that's just an observation. It's true, but why do you say it? You know, it's a commentary on kind of the passage of time, things rising and falling, which was kind of his trip. The other speaker like this was Jesus. Like, the kingdom of heaven is like a man went out to plow and blah, blah, blah. Just constantly talking by inference and by similarity and contrast all the time. Or even sometimes literal, well, who's the good neighbor? Well, here's the story, the Good Samaritan, blah, blah, blah. I mean, he just describes exactly what, it's not even a parable. It's just a description of what a good neighbor would be. And so he was really someone kind of from the backwaters of the Roman Empire who taught, he chose that way to speak, actually. It's pretty clear, because I could only find one syllogism, this is fascinating, that he used. If by the finger of God I cast out demons, then know that the kingdom of heaven in Aramaic is in touch with you. So that's got all these layers of poetry, and it is a syllogism, and it brings judgment. The syllogism always brings judgment on the listener. Do you agree or do you not agree? And you sound like a fool and an idiot if you can't agree with the obvious, oh yeah, Socrates is a mortal, isn't he? Yeah. But it's like, oh, I don't know if I believe in mortality. But see, that was the supposition, if all men are mortal. So, yeah. Well, so linguistics, very important on the shamanic path.
Well, you just said it's so important. We've done episodes in the past, actually, with the guy Kyle mentioned earlier, alchemist Stephen Young. He was a nuclear and theoretical physics PhD, who turned away from what he describes as the scientific Tower of Babel, where you have all of these layers of foundational ideas that society's entire cosmology or worldview is based on. Yeah. One is built on another, but each rung of this ladder has significant problems or is absolutely refutable. And starting at the base of atomism and going all the way up to heliocentrism, which we don't have to, we don't have to dwell on that, but no. I do appreciate how you talk about the spiritual nature of a geocentric worldview in your book. But I want to give Kyle a little bit of chance to riff on this idea of the green language and the original language of nature, how nature itself teaches us to think and communicate through correspondence by the very way that its sensory expressions of the leaf, the paw, the scent of a thing, all of the taste of a thing, all of the different elements of what emerges in the natural world themselves construct a type of catalog of states of consciousness through which our alphabets are originally formed, if that makes sense. The qualitative aspect of letters and numbers, not just their quantitative aspect.
The one that's coming to mind right now is I have like a little sinus cold. It's draining, and before I it's getting in my lungs. And so before I got on the call today, I decided I'm going to put a little cayenne in some water, which is really helpful for the voice. It's helpful for draining. It's drying. It's good for drying out the head. And the botanical name of cayenne is capsicum. And with that, with using green language, it's not philological 1-to-1. It's a green language of cap, my head, the top, capsicum, the top, the head of here comes the head, here it comes down, it's draining down.
Yeah, it's coming.
And so of course,
It's coming.
yeah, exactly. So the botanical name is a description based on this, what's the word? Like a direct observation. But even within the botanical name, and even more commonly, the common name, you could find parts and pieces to tease out to work with that signature, which is going beyond the description and into the language of inference, which is a driving of the personal relationship that you can have with the plant and how it can speak to you personally. Now, it's really hard for me to teach cayenne in that manner, but it's really easy for cayenne to teach me in that manner when I'm receptive to it. And that's the idea that I find with this language of nature is that, and when it comes to visions as well. There was the last plant that I had a vision of. This was about a week ago when I was really starting to get sick, and so I was laying in bed and I had a huge headache, and the plant that came into my mind was red clover, and lots of drainage in my sinuses and stuff like that, and red clover came to me as if it was, the visual aspect that I had is red clover going and like welding up a metal, piece of metal to hold something up in the ceiling. And the red clover even said, now don't forget the best part, bite and squeeze me. And this was all in like a fever dream, right? And I'm not actually, I didn't even have red clover. I was too sick to even get up to get it.
Yeah.
But it came to me this way. And then when I woke up, I felt, wow, I think it's actually stopped draining. And it reminds me of the way that when you have a spiritual relationship with a plant, it's almost like the same way that you have a relationship with a person. Like I could sit back here in my fever dream and think about a person that brings me so much joy, and it actually has a physiological response. It makes my heart beat faster. It makes me smile. It changes the state of mind that I have to woe is me. Oh, I'm so sick, to, you know what, when I get better, things are, I'm going to go out and to watch a movie with this person or something like that.
Yeah.
And the same way that plants could come when you have relationships with plants. And the way that it came to visit me, I didn't call on red clover. It just kind of came into the moment, if you will.
Yeah.
And I see that also as working as a language of sorts. And other ways I think about it too is taking the plant and then putting it up in the sky and seeing it in the constellations. And red clover to me really looks like the constellation Cetus, which is it's not in the zodiac, but it's the monster that swallowed Jonah, and so here it is again, like swallowing this some sort of baggage in order to prevent it from leaking more. And there's so much pleasure I take just in the aspect of having the relationship of the language of the plant and the relationship too.
And the language is personal and always changing. It could change. You could kind of understand red clover in a different way on another day or something. Maybe it wouldn't cancel out the original understanding, but it's a language. That's why, like, when it's not like the language of the shamans is not something that's fixed. And it is personal, but the better you get at it, the more you can express yourself that way. The kingdom of heaven is like, you learn a way to do it. The more you get across, and in that case, that would be an example of someone trying to teach something that's completely invisible, and they still do it. They still try. And so it's a morphing language all the time. And one of the important things about it, almost the final period on the whole thing, is that it is deserving to know in the Native American style of language of learning. Not that, so you may have had this happen. You ask an Indian teacher about something Native American, and they answer, and it's a story that's analogous to what you asked about, but it's not a blatant answer like if, then, boom. It's an analogous story. So you have to figure that out. You have to make that leap, and that's deserving to know. And that's Indian education, and that's education based on this type of thinking, when this type of thinking is dominant. Whereas our education, it's like no child left behind. It's like we've kind of got democracy run amok, where the belief is that everybody can be educated. And then, of course, they're leaving people out all over the place. And I mean, it's kind of like a sieve, and yet they're also teaching people, they'll be teaching some special needs kids, spending thousands of dollars on them, and then some poor kid can't even get lunch, And so it's like a sieve, and it's a theory and an idea, and it's not true. It's a lie. No child left behind. A lot of children are going to get left behind. And even no matter how hard we try, that's always going to be the case. It's just the way life is not democratic, or the spirit is not democratic. I guess you could definitely say that. It's like one little pebble, not another one. I never thought of it that way. It seems terrible, actually. It seems kind of even terrible to me. But so deserving to know versus, everybody can know. So
like there's not the same amount of medicine in one rock or another.
Yeah.
The idea of equality is a misunderstood application of the idea that everything is created equal in the sense that it's created from the same source. Equality is not a reality, because literally that's trying to impose quantity onto quality, which is what I've been trying to get at. Is like, I've had this revelation recently, actually coming through comparing chemicals through the idea of the classical quintessential elements, as opposed to the idea that there are actually active ingredient chemicals inside of various plant compounds that are responsible for the effects, which is a very dubious science at the very least, you could say, but coming to it from an understanding of a different balance of elemental qualities in the classical esoteric sense, it is a lot simpler and allows for the intuition to come through. My point being, equality is trying to say that we all have an equal quantity of the quality of worth or value across the whole spectrum of qualities, which is absolutely crazy. There, men and women are apparently now our federal government has mandated that there actually are men and women and that they are of different qualities, which is great. I'm glad that we got there. But the point being, though, that we can't have equality in a forced measure. It just doesn't. That's not nature, and it doesn't. And it's not even putting a value of better or worse. It's just saying there are myriad qualities, and to ignore that is at our own peril in terms of divorcing ourselves from reality.
Yeah, I like this. No child left behind. How about no rock left behind? Yeah, all rocks are created equal. That's true, but it's also, wow, you're sure missing a lot of the fine stuff.
So this is a tougher question to get at, but both of you fellas have talked about receiving visions from plants and be communicated to by plants, and that as like you said, after 15 years, herbalists are the same. I'm curious about maybe what are the steps on the path that someone might look for their footing on if they want to make the jump from learning in a sort of memorization style Western capacity of learning about herbs and their qualities and virtues versus the leap into the intuitive and how to trust that knowledge. Where I'm sure it's different for everybody, but what are some starting points to get there?
Well, I suppose you need both, actually. And I couldn't understand herb books when I started, which was, I started working in the herb store in 1981. That was when I really had to understand herbs. But even before that, I really couldn't understand them. I did read them all the time. And I took botany classes, so that was good in the early 70s. So I looked at plants. I knew what they looked like. I believed in the doctor's signatures from the first glance, I could say. And I even had a teacher in botany, freshman botany, Dr. Lawrence, who he kind of got where I was coming from. He said, "You really understand the essence of that plant." I was like, wow, I didn't think in college I'd ever have somebody that actually understood what I was doing. I remember also another botany class, Plants Useful to Humans, which he had founded. He was retired though. The professor took over. He said, and so they thought the doctrine of signatures. And so they thought, oh, the walnut, the nut inside the shell looked like the brain inside the skull. So it was a brain remedy. And I was sitting there in my seat with 150 other people like, wow, I actually learned something in college. Let's see. I can't remember what was your question. I got off on it a little bit, but
I got something to add about finding ways of gaining intuitive fields with the plant. So one of the things that our mutual friend Jim McDonald does, and our mutual friend Linda Conroy, you know Linda, right?
Yeah, right.
Linda and I had the same birthday actually, and both Linda, I, and Susan Weed have all the same birthday. So
oh my God,
that might say something about our personalities here.
That should become an herbal holiday.
But one of the things that I learned from them and I do with my classes is mystery tea. And so what we do is I make a big old quart or pint or, of something that I think is, safe for anybody that's going to take without having to go through their whole health history or whatever. So we'll use agrimony as an example.
Oh, yeah.
And actually I was looking in the notebook. I have the last time I did this with agrimony. And so I do the mystery tea. And so this is the deal is that people can see the tea. They can smell it. Yeah. First they smell it or they hold it. And then they start to just say what it is that they're feeling. What is this plant without even consuming it, making me feel? Wow, it makes me feel like sitting up more straight, or it makes me feel more relaxed, or I have to go to the bathroom all of a sudden. And then after a few minutes of that, then I'm just writing down everything. I'm not keeping my poker face on because I know what it is, and I'm not trying to be like, that's really interesting. Then after a few minutes, people start to sip it, and then the impressions keep coming. And with the agrimony one, this was really funny because in your book, you talk about agrimony as the wolf medicine. Yeah. And so as people started drinking agrimony, a dog walked, a person was walking their dog, and they walked by with their dog, and everybody's attention, which was right here, focused on the tea ceremony, went like this.
Yeah. Right.
Like a dog.
And, yeah. They were watching the dog like, who's that coming into my territory?
Yeah, right.
And they started getting their hair sticking up on their arms. And of course, agrimony, you and I know agrimony, it has this hair sticking up on its arms.
Yeah.
And it's almost like the dog that gets the hair sticking up on the back. Like,
yep.
Who is this powerful dog coming into my territory? It was hilarious. But I'm like trying to sit here with my mouth. I'm like, this is great. This is really good stuff. And then, of course, after a while, I reveal it. And I usually do this on a plant walk. So I do the mystery tea, and then we pack up and we have lunch, and then we go find the plant, and then we say, here it is again. And then I recall everything. And so this is a really great way of having the student trust their intuition. Yeah. Because then at that point, I pull out Matt's Earthwise Herbal, and I talk about all the stuff of agrimony that they had just mentioned. Yeah. And how it helped with the tension, and how Matt calls it a wolf medicine, and it's good for hierarchy, and all the magical correspondences that happen with this plant in particular is very, very magical as well. And it's a wolf medicine. You could also say it's familiar and friendly with the dogs, especially if you have a dog. You're always pulling off agrimony burrs off of your dog in the fall time. But that's a really good way, is just getting yourself a partner, getting yourself a cup of tea, having one person blind and the other person, and allowing that space to be, have the trust in my intuition and in my interpretation, and then go to look at the book and learn that way.
Yeah, the leader of the pack, the leaflet on the end. Yeah, so it really has that, not just a wolf medicine, but actually that whole thing of, yeah, my territory. Like, what? Yeah. 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 And actually, we should say for our listeners, if there's one plant that is magical, that's reliable. In fact, I would say agrimony is the most reliable plant I know in herbal medicine. And what it's reliable for is changing the situation for a magical use. I mean, it's like crazy. It will, any problem with hierarchical arrangements, it will change for the better, and it will not change. It can't be abused like black magic or something, dark magic. It will only change. It will establish justice. I sometimes think of it as justice leaf too, but it establishes justice between two parties dealing with hierarchical type issues. It's usually not for relationship issues, back and forth, two people, even partners, unless one of them brings a problem home from a hierarchical, from work or something like that. Then there might be some relevance, but it's very specific there. And it's like, I kind of wish like this should be sprayed all around Washington, D.C., actually.
Well, Matthew, it's been a real pleasure, dude. If you'd like to give your, tell people where they can find your institute and your book, maybe give them, if possible, one more reason why they might want to pick up your new book or any of your previous ones.
Well, if they haven't figured out, if they don't like what I'm talking about yet, then it's hopeless. But here's the Shamanic Herbal, Inner Traditions, available, yes, at all your regular stores. It's the culmination of my writing. I probably will never write a book better than that, although I'm going to talk about the 4 pillars. I'm glad for your feedback on that. I got to stay in touch with both of you guys. This is too fruitful to...
Yeah, we could easily do this again. I have so much left on the table, the notes from the book, and I'm sure Kyle does too.
Yeah. So, and then I'm at Matthew Wood Institute of Herbalism.com. And let's see, you'll probably be given your address, but send me a link where I can start watching tapes of the vital force, the vital power.
Yeah, man, definitely.
Yeah. Thank you. And we will tune in next summer when I'm on my way to Upper Michigan. I'll work out a way to visit over there.
Yeah, we'll get in touch about that. It'd be great to meet you in person, Matthew. And it's been an awesome chat. Thank you so much, Chance, for having us. Nature is alive. It's a person. It is alive.
Yep. Okie doke. We'll see ya.
All right. Thanks a lot, guys.
Bye.
Hallelujah. That was as fun as I knew it would be, but also more fun in a lot of ways, because that dude has just got such a mutable energy that the wanderings that he took us on, some of which were unexpected, were quite enjoyable. And I just feel like I was basking in the wisdom energy of an elder, so I'm really glad that we got to do that. Thanks for being my I don't want to say sidekick, because really you've got more knowledge in this field than me, but you were my comfort buddy that gave me confidence to talk to someone at this level about this subject, and you had a lot of great stuff to add, man. Thank you so much.
Yeah, man. Thanks. It was really great to chat with him too. I can't believe in the second hour how he revealed that dream of the 4 pillars. I thought that was really special. He said that he'd never taught that before to anybody, and we kind of coaxed that out of him. So 4 pillars of healing with the archetype and the vital force and so on.
Yeah, I'll just go over the plus extension. I'm not exactly sure where it's going to split because we went over 2 hours, which is always great. I'll try to hit it as close to the middle as I can for the free and the plus people. But, we definitely were talking about this measuring of the vital force and the different ways to go about that. And he talked about this dream of 4 pillars of evaluation, you could say, or shamanic healing. Those two things, we've talked about in the past how evaluation and healing are not really separate processes. The evaluating and the bringing witness to things is a crucial part of the healing process. The other things in the plus extension, and I'm give you time to riff on it too, but we discussed changing our commitments being related to the allowing of detoxification in the body. We talked about the three selves, human, animal, and spirit self, and the universality of that particular division of awareness of who we are. And we talked about meeting medicine animals and the familiar spirit and the fairies, the exceptional plant mullein, and other remedies to detox the old cowpoke. That part got a little too spicy for YouTube, so my YouTube channel members, you're gonna have to find that on Patreon or Rockfin, unfortunately. But I learned my lesson after the Ghost Doctor episode got me dinged for 2 weeks. But yeah, Kyle, what about the plus extension sticks out to you for people to sort of be enticed over there?
It's just awesome because his enthusiasm, which I just found out the word enthusiasm means to one that is possessed with God. Enthusiasm.
Favorite word.
Yeah, it's great. So his enthusiasm of his subject never waned. His energy never waned. And he's sitting there the whole time. And he's an esteemed elder, for sure. And yet he has a way of connecting with his message that's beyond himself. And so it just kept flowing and flowing and flowing and flowing. And with every direction it goes to, it was always capable of being weaved in with all the fun things that you like to talk about on your podcast that I also like to talk about too. And it's just it was really fun. I enjoyed meeting this man who has taught me so much, and I learned and I practice so much of his message all the time. But it was especially fun just to hang in there because I thought, oh, we've passed 2 hours. Oh, we've passed 2 hours and 15 minutes. Here we keep going. Here we keep going.
Fun here. Yeah, I like that because the weave was allowed to be what it was. And then, I'm sure that there's a lot of demands on Mr. Wood's time, being that he's such a far-reaching teacher. They say don't meet your heroes, but there are exceptions to that rule. Like when I got to have a similar meeting with Eileen McCusick after initiating myself into her biofield tuning methodology was very exciting in the same way and not disappointing in the least. What I'm most stoked about is the possibility that there's future collaborations for you and Matthew possible in him coming to check out the Tippecanoe shop. He doesn't live all that far from Milwaukee. That's going to be cool.
It seemed, especially towards the end there, I started to get, I started to tell like, oh, wow. I think I've impressed my teacher, and it was a really good feeling. And I think he used the words, I'm going to have to follow up with you guys. And this has been a very fruitful time. And so it was not only is that a good feeling in an interview, but it's just a good feeling when you meet somebody like him in general. Right. So I'm also excited about that too.
Well, and not to toot my own horn, but I think that's something that sets InnerVerse apart, generally speaking, from other interview podcasts of a 2-hour format, is that both myself and the guest, or in this case, all three of us, the way that our energies mesh is beyond just Q&A, where there's epiphanies on both sides that build off of each other and resonate more and more clearly to the point where, we're not just rehashing things we know, but we're stepping away from this with a synthesized understanding that goes beyond what was there to begin with. And particularly, this was my first exposure to Matthew Wood, was checking out this Shamanic Herbal book. So I'm kind of starting at the end, right? You've been following his stuff for years and years. And I think now I understand why the particular directions of the information on this podcast would resonate with you if that's your top herbal teacher, because this guy's got a foot in every single world that we like to play in.
Definitely. Yep. Yeah. From the spiritual to the, the scientific. Of course, we could talk about pharmacology and get into hallucinogenic aspects of plants, but we could also just bring it into an archetypical, could put it in language that we can easy to understand, which is quality-based language, like hot, like cold, like damp, like dry, something that can be very descriptive of the world and its qualities, and the love of that in language as well. So, and you really should toot your own horn, man. You're the best in the biz. This is the best show. And once people log into hour 2, they're going to remember why, of course.
Yep, that's going to be on Patreon or Rockfin. Not YouTube this time, but, check the link below. A meager $8 a month on Patreon gets you the whole archive of everything I've ever done. And like this episode, there's really no timestamp on when this would be fresh and exciting information. This would be a conversation that could bring value to somebody in 5 years or 50 years. And that's because we're talking about the perennial wisdom, right? I mean, there is no wisdom tradition that doesn't derive its origin from the language of plants, and animals too, in my humble opinion, because that's the origin of language itself. And that's how God speaks to us, is through these correspondences, is how we reveal the truth or the qualities of truth. I loved that the weave about quality over quantity keeps bearing fruit for me after talking to Steve Young. That has been incredible. I wanted to give a few points from his book that we didn't touch on that I found really great. Like, just example of how excellent his writing is. You don't even have to be intrigued in herbalism particularly to get something out of the Shamanic Herbal book. If you have any curiosity about shamanism, take it from me. I've read a lot of books about shamanism, and this is one of the best out there that helps you grasp what it really is. Maybe not necessarily giving you like an instruction manual, but you get the feel of what it, like how this experience will unfold for a person. So he says, this is my favorite definition of a shaman I've ever heard. A shaman is anyone of any culture who experiences their animal self as a being as complete and important as their conscious or human self. This is why the universal symbol of the shaman is the half animal and half human ideogram. Boom. I mean, does it get better than that? And then later he says, the development of spiritual life requires the actualization of the animal self, which otherwise actually serves as the teeth-bared guardian of the spirit world, waiting for the time to arrive when we are integrated and developed enough to survive the jolt into the hyperspace of the spirit world. Man, that's a little more abstract, but what, Kyle, is this animal self like something that you've grappled with or integrated? Is this part of your experience?
It's not something I've integrated. It's something that I have grappled with, though. And I thought it was really fun for him to identify in one of my animal bodies. And I think that was later in the show too. So that was also quite an honor, but it makes sense to me from the plant perspective because of how the plants can have a relationship with animals, because animals eat them, because they look like an animal. In the case of geranium cranesbill, it actually looks like a crane. And it actually helps with bringing messages and delivering children, just like storks do. And so on. So it's not only is it a great way to understand the natures of one's psyche, but it's also a great way to understand how what we see around us is also a reflection of within, including the plants, including the animals, and how the archetypical nature of a deer doesn't change. It's always going to be a little edgy, a little startled, sometimes playful, moving its ears around on the edge of the public in the field and on the edge of the private. And so there's your sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system kind of weighing back and forth, and how deer medicine has a relationship to that. That's something that I feel very that I'm working with, whether or not that's my animal body or it's something I'm working with as a kidney medicine, you could say. So yeah, it's always something I grapple with, and it makes a lot of sense. And it's just another way of describing nature, reality, which is sometimes you can only go so far with people when you're talking about plants. And because not everybody has the same type of relationship and attunement to plants as they do with the birds that they see or the lizards that they remember playing with when they're children. And this is a really great way to close that gap in and also know more about yourself.
Another thing I really appreciate was there's this nebulous term that is central to every mystical tradition, wisdom. What is wisdom? That's is a different meaning to anyone you ask, but he defined two kinds of wisdom in the book that I thought was perfect. The first kind of wisdom is the one derived from living a good-hearted and successful life. He says, with time, we learn how to be a better person, coming from the heart, also to remove ourselves from a situation where our heart would be vulnerable or even where our soul could be damaged. We might call this the wisdom of life. And to just boil that down in my words, it's like, if you do your best to be a good person and listen to the loudest part of your inner voice that will ever talk to you, which is right from wrong, your conscience, then wisdom naturally flows out of that, and a successful life naturally flows out of that. There's even like the idea of cities in the East, like spiritual powers. There's always like a virtue attached to it. And he does talk about like the dark side of shamanism, that there's dark power accessible that maybe doesn't require virtue. I don't know about that, but I do know that there's power in virtue in and of itself that is maybe not quantifiable, but it's definitely qualifiable. And then the other kind of wisdom he talks about is the kind that derives from observing and learning the underlying patterns or archetypes of nature, aka like doctrine of signatures. And that's great. I think those two kinds of wisdom, those are absolutely the pillars of any mystery school tradition, or like even Freemasonry is supposed to be about raising you up to be a better man. And those are the two ways to do it. Also, I liked that as good at riffing as he is, he's not afraid to push back when he disagrees. Like I was talking about the conversation with the archetypes and how they're changeable. And it was too short of I can always I can vibe with what he said when he pushed back against that an hour or two. And he's like, no, they're not changeable. And I could say, well, I mean, so much as what part of the archetype you touch or experience, that is changeable. The archetype itself doesn't change. Do you get the light or the shadow version? Do you get the east or the west version, the north or the south version? Like there's a field of probabilities within every archetype, like the interpretations within a tarot card. But that aside, I liked that we got an example of, no, I'm standing my ground on this. I don't agree with that. He wasn't just sort of pure yes and without any kind of boundary. Right. But anyway, I'm rambling. I had a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was really fun, man. I hope we could get him on a Vibrant. That would be really cool too.
It sounds really possible based on the way that he was at the end there that we might collaborate again. Yeah. Now, I wanted to tell you also a story, a tuning story. I brought up this client in the conversation, the gentleman I worked with about, which was a completely new thing to work on for me, the picky food question. And why I wanted to bring this up to you, apart from the synchronicity of it, was to see like what you thought about the why. And I'm sure this dude's listening too, and it'll give him some extra context. But he signed up for not just a biofield tuning, but also an oracle card reading session, which we just did back to back. So I tuned him, and then I did cards with him. And with cards, I pull out the I Ching, the tarot. I have a bunch of different kind of oracle decks. A shamanic oracle is one of my favorite ones. And I pick and choose from the pile that I've got based on the individual and what I feel would vibe with them most. And in this reading, two things came up that ended up being hugely synchronistic. The first was that I drew the card corn. And without getting into all the meanings of why corn came up as a symbol for him in his reading, I also got from this herbal, you might have this. I think you might even sell this. It's the herbal astrology oracle. Yeah. And I drew one card from this, and it was supposed to be like the meditation card. And this was the most powerful, hard-hitting card that I drew of the whole reading. And it was hibiscus. No, I'm sorry, not hibiscus. Echinacea. So I draw echinacea. It's all about, according to this card, destiny. And we're able to weave in like that this whole, changing of your food preferences is completely tied into unlocking your destiny. And it's actually a step of your destiny. It was massive. And I recommended like, hey, go find some echinacea, wear it in a medicine pouch or just work with it. You don't even necessarily have to consume it. And he says, okay, I'm going to a farmer's market tomorrow and there's a herbalist there. I'll ask for echinacea. Then I get an email from him that he goes to the farmer's market. There's no, he tried new foods the very next day too, which was great. But he goes to a farmer's market and the herbalist is just out of echinacea. Like they sold the last to the person before. So come back next week. I'll have some for you. And he comes home, has their business card. He's going to put it on his fridge so he remembers to reach out to them again. He's looking for a refrigerator magnet to put the card on the fridge. And the 2 refrigerator magnets that were available that he'd just been oblivious to up to that point was a corn and an echinacea flower. I kid you not. Those were the 2 magnets that he had were just like a drawing of corn and a drawing of echinacea. I was like, you can't make this stuff up.
That is awesome. Wow, that's amazing. In my Astro Herbal, I put echinacea in Pisces, which is with a little bit of imagination, we can get picky to Pisces.
Hey, yeah.
And echinacea is a picky, pokey plant. It's the echine. It's the spine. It's the
echinoderm, yeah.
Yeah, it's the echinoderm. And so it is the reflection of the plants that have spines like echinacea, like cactuses. And when we project on them, we think they want their space. But if we can internalize what a plant like that is, as if it were like our medicine, we could see that maybe there's some things around us that we're picky about because we want to be pokey, and that's just our nature, is just to maintain space. So pickiness is it has some communication to maintaining your space or maintaining control. But then echinacea is a great one for draining toxicity associated with that type of attitude, if you will, or with other things that we've been holding on to. So perfect card. Pisces.
This dude experienced the effects of echinacea without even incorporating the plant, just by bringing his consciousness to it, seeking it out. It's like, yeah, you didn't get the flower at the herbalist, but you come home and echinacea finds you. So I think that was the sign of like, nope, you're working with it. It's affecting you. Still get some, sure, why not? But that's a great example of like, yeah, write the name of the plant down and put it in your pocket. Or,
yep,
it's about the spiritual quality and essence. Like this is all a mind space. Your body's in your mind. It was one of my favorite examples ever of that exact truth.
That's so cool, man. That's so cool. I feel that I do that all the time. Sometimes I can't get to the plants that I need, but I can just write them down. And I definitely do that in clinic all the time too. And I know I could see, I could perceive, I could feel the changes in people when that happens just by putting a piece of paper into their hand with the right herb that they need. And yeah, very cool stuff, man.
This has been awesome. Got to remind people, Tippecanoe Herbs with the coupon code InnerVerse gets you 10% off. Yeah, benefit Kyle and his family and employees by making a purchase from there. You get the best quality herbal medicine that I know about, and I get a kickback for the referral code.
Yes.
And you get the 10% off. It's like a win-win-win-win-win.
Totally.
I got a Tippecanoe package to go tear open when I get off of this call.
Great, man. I'm glad you did. So, yeah, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to send off stuff in the mail to the people that I see in the chat and all of the InnerVerse people out there. It's a great pleasure to be of service and also to collaborate. Thanks so much, Chance, for having me, man. This was so much fun.
We'll do it again as many times as I can squeeze out of you. You're like one of the best people on the planet, in my opinion, and the most perfectly aligned with the vision of this podcast, with the knowledge and skill set, tangential but different than my own. So, I just love every time we get to do it. Thanks so much for the time and the hang today, dude.
Right on. Thank you so much, dude.
All right, everybody, take care out there. We love you, and catch you later.